In the quiet suburb of Brookside Lane, evenings arrived softly, settling over rooftops like a warm sigh at the end of a long day. The neighborhood prided itself on peaceful routines, sprinklers humming at dusk, porch lights blinking on, and families settling into familiar rhythms. Each house followed an unspoken script of comfort and order, where nothing seemed out of place and every detail appeared gently curated. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing remarkable happened until one resident decided it had to the end of the cul-de-sac stood a modest blue house with white shutters and a small wooden porch. It wasn't the newest home nor the fanciest, but it held a quiet charm that belonged to families who had lived through gentle hardships and stitched their lives back together piece by piece. What set this porch apart wasn't its paint or decor. It was a simple wooden swing, hand-built and hung with thick rope. A swing that creaked softly at night, rocking two silhouettes who found peace in its steady rhythm. Karen, who lived 3 houses down, believed order was the spine of civilization. Every detail of her property glimmered with precision. She tended her lawn with military discipline, polished her mailbox weekly, and monitored neighborhood activity with the intensity of someone guarding priceless treasures. Her window blinds shifted like clockwork, revealing her watchful eyes, tracking anything she deemed disruptive. And lately, her attention had zeroed in on the swing. She noticed at first when the ropes were installed, too thick, she thought. Too rustic. Too unsightly. Then she took note of the soft creaking at dusk. To anyone else, it was a gentle sound, a lullaby of wood and rope moving with the breeze or with company. But to Karen, it became a daily irritation. She timed it. She listened for it. She built a case around it in her mind. As the days passed, Karen's complaints began forming like storm clouds behind her thoughtful frown. She disliked anything that deviated from her idea of suburban perfection, and the porch swing, innocent, quiet, and handmade, became her newest target. The family who lived in the blue house consisted of a father named Adam and his young daughter, Lily. Though neighbors rarely saw them during the day, the evenings painted a different picture. Each night, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with strokes of orange and lavender, Adam would lead his daughter out onto the porch. Lily, a delicate girl with wide, curious eyes, carried herself with the calm attentiveness of someone who lived in her own world, a world not always aligned with others, but no less meaningful. For Lily, the world could be overwhelming. Loud noises, bright lights, sudden changes, they could unravel her peace faster than words could express. But the swing provided something the rest of life rarely did: predictability, rhythm, comfort. It held her gently, swaying at the pace her heart understood best. Every evening, she nestled into her father's side, resting her head against his shoulder as the porch light glowed softly behind them. Adam would wrap one arm around her small frame, grounding her through the sensory overloads she battled each day. Their nightly ritual was more than a routine. It was medicine. It was bonding. It was survival. But Karen didn't see that. She saw only what she wanted to see: a disruption to her curated environment. The creak, the presence of people outdoors after sunset, the slow sway of a swing she insisted was non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetics. And because she never asked, never wondered, never cared to know the story behind things, she assumed her annoyance was proof that something was wrong. Soon, she began documenting her grievances in her notebook. She took photos at sunset, muttering about violations. She wrote down the times she heard the swing. Each creak tallied like a personal offense. She complained to anyone who walked by, though few wanted to get swept into her cycle of irritation. Many nodded politely, offering quick excuses to leave. But Karen didn't need agreement to feel justified. She only needed the momentum of her own certainty. Her fixation grew until the swing became less of an object and more of an enemy in her mind. Its warm glow under the porch light became offensive. The silhouettes of father and daughter became silhouettes of defiance. And the soft hum of their quiet bonding became an irritant she couldn't ignore. The neighborhood, however, saw something very different. Mrs. Whitaker, An elderly widow with a gentle heart often paused during her evening walks to smile at the pair on the swing. It reminded her of the nights her late husband would hold her on their own porch, swaying to the hum of crickets. She never disturbed them, only treasured the serenity of the scene. Teenagers walking home from study groups passed by with soft admiration, feeling something tender and grounding in the sight of Adam and Lily rocking under the starlight. The swing seemed to radiate peace, a sense of home in the way few things did. Young parents admired the dedication Adam poured into his daughter, touched by the patience and gentleness he showed. They whispered that the world needed more fathers like him. But one complaint can sometimes grow louder than 100 unspoken praises, especially when the complainer directs it toward the HOA. And Karen, armed with her notebook, photos, and conviction, was ready to make her case. The moment she filed the first complaint with the HOA, something in the air shifted. The association received it with their usual blend of formality and caution, unsure whether the issue was legitimate or merely another entry in Karen's long history of grievances. They promised to review the swing's placement and compliance, fully aware that sometimes these things resolve themselves when tempers cooled. But Karen was relentless. Each evening she watched from her window, her irritation intensifying as the swing rocked gently. The image of the father and daughter, peaceful, tender, and unaffected by her displeasure, seemed to provoke her further. And she had no idea the depth of the bond she was threatening to disturb. Lily, in her world of heightened senses and delicate emotions, had no awareness of rules or complaints. All she knew was that every evening, the porch swing carried her gently into a space where she felt safe, a place where the world slowed to match her rhythm, a place where her father's heartbeat was steady and familiar, and Adam, exhausted from the daily challenges of raising a child with autism on his own, lived for these quiet moments. The swing wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a bridge between his daughter's world and his own. It was where she laughed softly, where she leaned into him without fear, where she found a calm he could not create any other way. These moments mattered more than the house they lived in, more than the yard, more than the entire street. But Karen didn't know that. Not yet. Her complaint set off a chain of events that would soon divide the neighborhood, awaken its compassion, and expose truths she had never imagined. A porch swing had become the center of a conflict far greater than she understood. And soon, the heart of the community would be tested. And the real story, Adam's, Lily's, and the swings, was only just beginning to unfold. The days following Karen's formal complaint unfolded with an uneasy quiet, like a neighborhood holding its breath without understanding why. Brookside Lane continued its predictable rhythms. The hum of early sprinklers, the rumble of garbage trucks, the soft chatter of evening walkers. But beneath the surface, something fragile was shifting. The calm was still there, but it had a tension threaded through it, a subtle strain felt by those closest to the blue house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Adam had no idea that a complaint had landed at the HOA office with his name attached. Not yet. His days followed the same demanding cadence. Work, therapy appointments for Lily, quick dinners, exhaustion, and then the single ritual that held everything together, the porch swing at dusk. For Lily, the swing was more than comfort. It was a sensory anchor. The gentle sway soothed her nervous system. The creaking would become a predictable melody. The steady feel of the ropes beneath her fingers grounded her. After a day filled with overwhelming stimuli, the swing offered her a transition from the chaos of the world into a pocket of calm. For a father, these evenings were an emotional lifeline. Parenting an autistic child alone came with moments of both triumph and heartbreak. Silent victories only he witnessed, silent struggles only he understood. But the swing was where Lily opened herself, where she leaned on his shoulder, where he felt the close, fragile connection he spent all day fighting to sustain. Every evening felt like a prayer answered quietly, one swing at a time. But someone else was watching, someone who saw only inconvenience, never intimacy. Karen's irritation deepened the more she fixated on the swing. Each night, she stood rigid near her window blinds, the soft glow of the neighbor's porch light reflecting on her tense expression. She watched the father and daughter sway gently, growing increasingly resentful of their calmness, their peace, their presence. It bothered her that they paid no mind to her frown, that the swing existed without her approval, that her sense of order was disrupted by the soft, wooden creak that, to her, sounded like defiance. When she checked her email and saw no follow-up from the HOA about enforcement action, her frustration sharpened into resolve. She convinced herself the problem was bigger than noise or aesthetics. It was about principle, about keeping Brookside Lane civil, structured, and in compliance. So she escalated. She took new photos, this time from closer angles. She measured the swing with a tape measure in the early morning, jotting down ratios and rope lengths as if documenting a crime scene. She even enlisted a neighbor who politely listened but ultimately stepped away, uncomfortable with her intensity. Then she returned to the HOA office, demanding action. The HOA board members, accustomed to her near-weekly grievances, felt her urgency but also sensed something off. Her arguments were thin, built from personal annoyance rather than legitimate violations. The swing wasn't too large. It wasn't unsafe. It wasn't against code. And the soft creaking she complained about did not constitute noise pollution. Still, they promised to look into it, hoping to pacify her long enough for the issue to dissolve on its own. It didn't. Meanwhile, the neighborhood observed things Karen failed to see. Every evening, as the sun melted behind the trees, neighbors walking their dogs passed the blue house and softened at the sight of Adam and Lily in their swing. There was something undeniably tender about it. The way she rested her head against him, the way he gently matched her breathing, the way the swing seemed to cradle them both. The elderly widow, Mrs. Thompson, found herself pausing each night on her stroll, watching the pair with a nostalgic ache. It reminded her of when her late husband built her a swing similar to that one, long before time and illness took him away. She kept those memories close, warm evenings, long talks, gentle silences, and seeing Adam and Lily stirred that old comfort inside her chest. She whispered blessings only the wind heard. Teenagers walking home from tutoring noticed the duo as well. Even the most restless among them softened when they passed that porch. Between their exams, sports, and pressures, the sight of a father and daughter simply rocking in harmony reminded them of the things that made life feel real, grounding, human. Many of them had grown up seeing Lily, knowing she struggled in ways they didn't fully understand, and the swing became a symbol of her safe space. Young parents, exhausted from toddlers and tantrums, took comfort in the sight too. They admired the patience Adam displayed, the way he poured all his love into his daughter without expecting anything in return. In him, they saw a quiet strength rarely acknowledged. But while the hearts of the neighborhood leaned toward compassion, Karen's leaned into obsession. A week after the initial complaint, the HOA finally reached out to Adam. The letter was carefully worded, dripping with polite authority. It stated that a concern had been raised about the porch swing, citing potential noncompliance with aesthetic uniformity and possible noise disturbances. Adam frowned as he read it, confusion washing over him. The swing had never bothered anyone, he thought. He had built it himself, carefully, lovingly. After one particularly difficult week when Lily couldn't be soothed by anything except the rocking motion. The swing had changed their lives. Losing it wasn't an option he could fathom. Still, Adam wasn't confrontational. He simply reread the letter, trying to understand what he had missed. His tired mind wandered through possibilities. Perhaps someone found the porch too cluttered? Perhaps the ropes weren't allowed? Perhaps the HOA was stricter than he realized? He had no idea that the target was not the swing at all, but the quiet ritual it represented. He tucked the letter away, planning to attend the next HOA meeting for clarification. But even then, the weight of the issue pressed on him. Lily's happiness was fragile. Her routines were sacred. If the swing had to be removed, he feared what it might do to her sense of safety. He didn't share the letter with her, of course. She wouldn't understand, and he didn't want to burden her with something abstract and painful. Instead, that evening, he guided her gently to the porch. As they settled into the swing, he held her a little tighter than usual. Lily, sensitive to shifts in her environment, sensed the tension. She curled closer, pressing her small hands into his shirt as though trying to anchor him the way he anchored her. The swing rocked softly. The sky dimmed. And for a moment, everything felt safe again. But across the street, Karen watched with a tightening jaw. She saw the HOA letter in Adam's mailbox earlier that day. She assumed it was a warning. She assumed the issue was resolved. And yet here they were, swinging again, as if mocking the process she championed. Her irritation flared into something stronger, something harsher. She didn't understand what she was trying to destroy. Not yet, but soon, the neighborhood would make sure she learned. And when she did, it would be a lesson she would never forget. The tension in Brookside Lane did not erupt all at once. Instead, it rose gradually, like a quiet tide, swelling beneath unsuspecting feet, until the shift became impossible to ignore. The HOA meeting approached, and with it came whispers, wondering glances, and a slow buildup of unease that spread from porch to porch. Adam prepared himself carefully for the meeting. He wasn't a confrontational man, nor did he have the energy for battles he didn't choose. His days were spent navigating Lily's needs, managing work, and holding the fragile threads of routine together. But the swing was not just wood and rope. It was his daughter's refuge, her anchor in a world that often overwhelmed her senses. He knew he couldn't let it be taken without trying to explain, calmly, honestly, fully, what it meant to her. On the evening of the meeting, he arranged Lily's favorite weighted blanket across her bed, whispered goodnight, and left her with the soft hum of her sensory lamp glowing beside her. A trusted neighbor agreed to watch her while he attended the gathering. The walk to the community center felt heavier than the air around him. He wasn't afraid of conflict. He was afraid of losing the small, precious piece of peace the swing offered his child. When he entered the room, it was already full. The HOA board members sat behind a long table adorned with papers, rule books, and the subtle stiffness of people who wanted to be taken seriously. Neighbors filled every chair, some leaning against walls, others standing in clusters. The community had turned out in greater numbers than usual, drawn partly by curiosity, partly by concern. Karen sat near the front, stiff and rigid, her chin lifted with proud expectation. She believed the meeting would validate her. She believed the community would support her complaints once they heard her perspective. She believed she was protecting Brookside Lane's dignity. What she didn't realize was how many people saw the swing and the family who used it in an entirely different light. When the meeting began, the HOA moved through minor agenda items quickly, sensing the room's anticipation. Eventually, the board president cleared her throat and shifted to item 4, the porch swing complaint. The room quieted like a held breath. The board invited Karen to present her concerns first. She stood, smoothing her shirt as if preparing to speak before a grand jury. Her voice, sharp, precise, outlined the same complaints she had written: disruption, non-compliance, noise, aesthetics. She described the creaking sound as invasive. She called the swing an eyesore. She insisted it damaged the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Some neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others sighed softly. A few looked down at their hands. Karen didn't notice. She continued with a righteous certainty, believing her logic was airtight. When she sat, her expression radiated victory. Then the board invited Adam to respond. He rose slowly, scanning the room, surprised by how many neighbors avoided Karen's gaze. He spoke quietly, not from rehearsed arguments, but from exhausted truth. He explained that his daughter was autistic and that the swing was her safe place, her nightly therapy, the one ritual that soothed her sensory overwhelm. He described the meltdown she endured, the struggles she faced navigating a world too loud, too bright, too unpredictable. That he explained how the swing helped her regulate, how the gentle rocking calmed her brain, how their daily routine depended on it. He told them of nights when the world was too heavy for Lily, and the swing was the only thing that eased her through the tears she couldn't voice. His narration wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional in the theatrical sense. It was honest, so honest it trembled in the air. Silence swallowed the room. Karen's posture faltered. Her shoulders stiffened, then sagged ever so slightly. Her eyes, usually narrowed in judgment, flickered with unsteady confusion. She had not expected this. She had not imagined anything deeper than annoyance. She had not known the swing carried a story. The board members looked stunned. Their carefully crafted language about aesthetic uniformity and noise compliance suddenly felt cold, irrelevant. They whispered among themselves, now aware that what they were regulating wasn't a lawn ornament or a garden gnome, but a medical necessity, a bonding ritual between father and daughter, a lifeline point one by one. Neighbors began shifting in their chairs. Something unspoken passed through the room. A realization, a collective stirring. They had all seen a pair on that swing. They had admired the small sweetness of those moments without knowing their weight. Now the sweetness held gravity. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow, stood up with deliberate slowness. Her voice, steady, tender, explained how she had watched Adam and Lily every evening and found comfort in the sight. She confessed that seeing them together reminded her of gentler days, bringing her warmth in her loneliness. A young mother stepped forward next, describing how her own child struggled with anxiety and how seeing Lily calm on the swing gave her hope. Another resident, a teenage boy, revealed how watching the duo helped him feel less alone on days when his own household felt distant and chaotic. Voices rose, gentle but firm, one after another, forming a chorus of empathy. They spoke not to attack Karen, but to defend the quiet love they had witnessed for months without understanding its full meaning. Karen listened, her cheeks warming, her chest tightening with something she rarely felt: self-doubt. She hadn't meant to hurt child. She hadn't meant to disrupt a fragile ritual. She had never considered anyone else's perspective. Standing there now, watching the community unite over a swing she had dismissed as a nuisance, she felt the sting of her own narrowness. The board, overwhelmed, asked for time to deliberate. They retreated briefly to a private room, leaving the residents murmuring quietly among themselves. During that pause, Karen stood alone. Neighbors didn't glare at her, but they didn't approach her either. She felt the unfamiliar ache of being on the outside, not because she wasn't included, but because she had chosen not to understand. For the first time in years, her rigid certainty wavered. When the board returned, their decision was written clearly across their softened faces. But before they announced it, something else happened, something that would transform Karen's role in this story and the community's relationship with her forever. Because before the board could speak, Lily herself appeared in the doorway. Wrapped in her weighted blanket, eyes wide and overwhelmed, she looked for her father. And when she spotted him, she rushed into his arms, not with fear, but with the raw instinct to return to the person who grounded her. The entire room witnessed it. Every heart felt it. And Karen, standing in the front row, understood in an instant what her complaints had threatened to take away. The HOA's decision, when announced, would reflect everything that had just unfolded. But the real shift had already begun. The real judgment had come not from rules, but from compassion. And the next chapter would bring consequences, clarity, and unexpected transformation, especially for Karen. The sight of Lily rushing into her father's arms cast a hush over the meeting room, one deeper and more profound than anything the HOA board could have orchestrated. Her small frame trembled beneath the weight of her blanket as she pressed herself against Adam, burying her face in the familiar comfort of his shirt. Adam held her instinctively, one hand wrapped around her shoulders, the other smoothing her hair with gentle reassurance. The neighbors watched with softened expressions, their hearts pulled into the quiet gravity of the moment. It felt intimate, fragile, yet necessary. A raw truth laid bare in front of those who needed to see it most. Karen stood only a few feet away, frozen. The image struck her in a place within herself she rarely visited. The place where regret lives before it's acknowledged, where empathy stirs before it has words. She saw not a nuisance or a violation of aesthetic standards, but a child seeking safety, a father giving everything he had, a bond she hadn't recognized because she had never bothered to look beyond her own perspective. The HOA board remained silent for a few breaths longer, respecting the moment. When they finally stepped forward to announce their decision, their voices carried gentleness, not the cold professionalism they usually displayed. They explained that after reviewing the situation, gathering community feedback, and witnessing the emotional significance of the swing, the HOA had voted unanimously to permit the porch swing to remain without restrictions. Not only that, they acknowledged it as essential for the family's well-being, falling under an exception for accommodations related to neurodivergent or sensory-sensitive needs. They apologized for the distress the process had caused and promised to update their guidelines to protect compassionate exceptions in the future. The room exhaled. Some neighbors nodded gratefully. Others brushed tears from their eyes, and a few whispered relieved prayers under their breath. But the shift that mattered most was happening inside Karen. Her rigid posture cracked just enough to reveal the emotion she tried to hide. She watched Lily cling to her father, her small body curled around him like a fragile vine around a sturdy branch. Memories she hadn't revisited in years fluttered through her mind. Moments of her own childhood, moments of vulnerability she had buried beneath decades of rules and control. She took a small, uncertain step forward. The room noticed. Adam noticed. Even Lily, though overwhelmed, peeked up briefly, her eyes landing on Karen with no understanding of the conflict, but with natural innocence. Karen's mouth opened as though she wanted to speak, but emotion caught her voice before any words escaped. Her eyes glistened for a brief, honest second. Then she lowered her gaze, stepping back, unable to face the truth of her own misunderstanding. The meeting adjourned, but the moment lingered like a soft echo. Outside the community center, neighbors gathered in small circles, speaking kindly, gently, relieved that the swing would remain, grateful for the unity the conflict had unexpectedly revealed. The moon hung low and generous, casting a pale glow across the street as families drifted toward home. IT took Karen several minutes before she stepped outside. When she finally emerged, she paused on the steps, watching Adam help Lily adjust her blanket. She watched him carry her to the car with practiced tenderness. She watched the way neighbors smiled at the pair as they passed. For the first time, she truly saw them. Guilt rose in her throat. Not the kind born from being caught or corrected, but the kind that comes from understanding harm you didn't intend, yet still caused. Her footsteps were hesitant as she approached them. Adam paused when he noticed her coming. Lily rested her head against his shoulder, thumb brushing the fabric of her blanket. Karen swallowed, though no words were spoken, because this story is narration only. What happened between them was a language of its own. Karen gently nodded toward the swing, then toward Lily. Her eyes softened. Her hands, usually stiff and purposeful, trembled slightly at her sides. It was an apology shaped without sound, but every bit as meaningful. Adam offered the smallest, weary, but gracious acknowledgement. He didn't need anger or confrontation. He didn't even need forgiveness. He only needed understanding. Karen stepped back, her expression humbled. The neighbors around her witnessed the change. Not dramatic, not sudden, but real. For some, it was the first time they'd seen Karen as something other than a source of complaints. Beneath the rigidity lived someone who had simply forgotten how to see through eyes of empathy. In the following days, Brookside Lane embraced a new sense of connection. The porch swing remained exactly where it had always been, creaking gently each evening as Adam and Lily took their place in its embrace. Neighbors walking by paused more often, not out of curiosity, but out of quiet appreciation for the simple beauty of the ritual. Children waved to Lily. Some left small drawings near her porch, hoping to make her smile. Parents spoke with Adam about sensory-friendly resources in the community. Teenagers who once passed silently now greeted him with nods of respect. Even Mrs. Thompson began knitting a small blanket for Lily. Soft, muted in color, gentle on her senses. But the most unexpected change came from Karen. She no longer stood behind her blinds during the evenings. Instead, she sometimes stepped on her own porch, cup of tea in hand, watching the sunset rather than searching for faults. She no longer measured her worth by how tidy things looked, but by how connected she felt. And on one particular night, when the air was cool and tinged with the scent of freshly cut grass, she noticed something remarkable. Lily, nestled beside her father, glanced across the street and lifted her hand in a small, shy wave that Karen's breath caught. She waved back, tentatively at first, then with genuine warmth. It was a small gesture, a small bridge, a small shift in a heart that had long been locked behind rules. Over time, the porch swing became more than a symbol of one family's refuge. It became a symbol of Brookside Lane's transformation. A reminder that compassion can be awakened even in the most unlikely places, even in the most stubborn hearts. Karen learned a lesson she never expected: that control does not create peace, and perfection does not create harmony. Human connection does. Adam learned he was not alone in the struggles of raising his daughter, that behind closed doors lived neighbors willing to stand beside him. And Lily, without knowing the conflict she inspired, continued to sway gently each evening in the place she loved most, bringing healing not only to herself, but to everyone who witnessed her quiet resilience. Because sometimes the smallest rituals carry the greatest power, and sometimes it takes a simple porch swing to remind an entire community how important it is to hold each other with understanding.